rebuilding bridges through forgiveness and second chances. I dated John for about 6 months. We had known each other for a year before we started dating, and I thought things were going well between us initially. But we broke up 3 months ago, and the reason for the breakup was his daughter, Tia. From the very beginning, Tia was openly hostile towards me. She made rude comments, mocked my cooking, and referred to me with derogatory names like that bitch. She blamed me for her parents' breakup, even though they had divorced 10 years ago, a full 9 years before I even met John. It was baffling and exhausting. I've had personal experience with step-parents. My own stepmom tried to force her way into my life, and it left a bitter taste in my mouth. So, I made a conscious decision to approach things differently. I gave Tia space. I tried to respect her boundaries and didn't push her to accept me. I even sat down with her to ask what I could do to make things between us at least civil. Her response? That I could voluntarily leave this world. John wasn't much help in handling the situation. He'd make threats like grounding her or taking her things away, but they were always empty. Tia quickly learned that he wouldn't follow through, so she continued her tirade against me. Even her mother, Chloe, tried to step in and figure out why Tia was acting this way. Chloe is honestly a great person, and I've always admired her level-headedness. But even she couldn't get through to Tia, who admitted she didn't have a specific reason for disliking me. She just didn't. Things came to a head one evening at my house. John and Tia were over, and we had ordered food. I went out to pick it up, and when I returned, I found John sweeping up the shattered remains of my grandmother's antique picture. That picture wasn't just an object, it was a piece of my grandmother, someone who meant the world to me. Seeing it destroyed broke my heart. I demanded to know what had happened. Tia smirked and said, "Oops, it was an accident." When I pressed her on how it could have been an accident, she shrugged and said something like, "I think I bumped the table and it just fell off." But I knew better. My dining table is heavy and solid. There's no way a slight bump could have caused the pitcher to fall. She must have slammed into the table intentionally. I couldn't take it anymore. I told John and Tia to leave and spent the rest of the night crying. The next day, I called John and told him that I couldn't do this anymore. He tried to talk me out of breaking up, but my mind was made up. The relationship wasn't worth the constant hostility and the emotional toll it was taking on me. Fast forward to 2 days ago. I was leaving work when I saw Tia waiting for me. She approached me, looking upset, and started talking about John's new girlfriend, Jane. According to Tia, Jane was a monster. Apparently, Tia tried her usual tricks on Jane, but Jane didn't put up with it. When Tia called Jane names, Jane fired back with insults of her own. When Tia insulted Jane, Jane did the same. And when Tia accidentally broke something of Jane's, Jane retaliated by taking Tia's phone and smashing it. Tia looked genuinely distressed as she recounted the events. I asked her if she had told her mom about what happened, and she said she had. Chloe, in response, decided that Tia wasn't to go over to John's house anymore. Hearing that, I told Tia something along the lines of, "It sounds like everything's settled then." Tia started crying and asked if that was it. I just looked at her and said, "Yeah, your mom handled it. It's not my problem." Then I walked away. Later that evening, I was talking to my sister about the encounter. She didn't hesitate to call me in awe. According to her, it was clear that Tia was hurting and needed me. She came to me for a reason, my sister said, and the least I could have done was be a shoulder for her to cry on. But I just didn't feel anything. I think I've become numb to Tia at this point. I don't have the energy to care about her anymore, not after everything she put me through. It feels like self-preservation to keep my distance. Yet, her tears and her desperation lingered in my mind longer than I'd like to admit. Was my response heartless? Maybe. But after months of enduring her hostility, I didn't feel like I owed her anything. Now, I can't stop replaying the conversation in my head. What did she want from me? Was she hoping it'd take her side against Jane? Did she think it'd confront John on her behalf? Or was it something else entirely? I'll probably never know, and part of me doesn't even want to. Yet, another part of me wonders if I missed an opportunity to bridge some kind of gap. I've been reflecting a lot since that encounter. Relationships are complicated, and blending families can be messy and emotionally draining. I thought I was prepared for the challenges, but Tia's relentless hostility tested me in ways I didn't expect. Was there something I could have done differently? Could I have been more patient or more understanding? It's hard to say. Tia's anger and pain seemed so deeply rooted, but she's just a teenager after all. Teenagers act out for all kinds of reasons, some of which have nothing to do with the target of their anger. Maybe I became a convenient scapegoat for her frustrations, or maybe I reminded her of something she couldn't articulate. Whatever the reason, it felt like I was always fighting a losing battle. Now, with John out of my life, I've been trying to move on. I've been focusing on work, spending time with friends, and rediscovering hobbies that bring me joy. But every now and then, I think about Tia and wonder what the future holds for her. Will she eventually grow out of this phase? Will she and John's relationship heal? And what about her relationship with Jane? I don't have the answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. For now, all I can do is keep moving forward and hope that the choices I've made were the right ones. Ever since that encounter with Tia outside my workplace, I've been wrestling with a mixture of emotions that I can't quite pin down. On one hand, I feel justified in keeping my distance and drawing a hard line. After all, I had endured months of relentless hostility, and my attempts to bridge the gap between us had been met with outright rejection or even cruelty. On the other hand, there's a small, nagging voice in the back of my mind whispering that maybe I could have handled things differently. In the days following our exchange, Tia's words kept replaying in my mind. The tears, the desperation in her voice, it was such a stark contrast to the defiance and disdain she had always shown me. I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more beneath the surface, something I had missed. But then I'd remember the smirk she had given me after breaking my grandmother's pitcher, and any guilt I felt would dissolve into frustration. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures of me and John at the start of our relationship, smiling and happy, unaware of the storm that was brewing. There were even a few candid shots of Tia, taken during the rare moments when she wasn't actively glaring at me. In those images, she looked like any other teenager, a little moody, a little awkward, but ultimately just a kid trying to navigate life. It made me wonder, was I so focused on protecting myself from her hostility that I overlooked her struggles? To try and make sense of it all, I reached out to Chloe. I hadn't spoken to her since the breakup, but we had always gotten along, and I trusted her perspective. When I called, she sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. We caught up for a while before I broached the topic of Tia. I saw her the other day, I began hesitantly. She seemed really upset about Jane. Chloe let out a sigh. Yeah, it's been a mess. Tia's been acting out more than usual, and I'm doing my best to keep things stable at home. But between her issues with Jane and her dad, well, let's just say it's been a challenge. I hesitated before asking the next question. Do you think I could have done anything differently? When we were together, I mean. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Honestly, I don't think it was about you, Chloe said finally. Tia's been struggling for a long time. The divorce hit her harder than she lets on, and I think she's been carrying a lot of anger and confusion ever since. You just happen to be an easy target. You're kind and you tried to connect with her, but that's exactly what scared her. She's afraid of letting anyone in because she's terrified of getting hurt again. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent so much time blaming Tia for her behavior that I hadn't stopped to consider what might be driving it. But even with this newfound understanding, I didn't know what to do with it. Was it too late to try and repair the damage? And even if it wasn't, did I want to? A few days later, I found myself wandering through a local park, trying to clear my head. The crisp air and the sound of leaves crunching beneath my feet offered a welcome distraction. As I walked, I noticed a group of teenagers gathered near a bench, laughing and talking animatedly. One of them reminded me of Tia, the way she tossed her hair over her shoulder, the confident yet slightly awkward posture. It made me wonder what Tia was like when she wasn't caught up in conflict. Did she laugh with her friends like that? Did she have people in her life who saw the side of her that I had only glimpsed in those fleeting, unguarded moments? That evening, I decided to journal about everything that had happened. Writing had always been a way for me to process my emotions, and I hoped it might help me untangle the complicated mix of feelings I had about Tia, John, and even Jane. As I wrote, memories started flooding back, not just the bad ones, but also the small, almost insignificant moments that I had overlooked. Like the time Tia had reluctantly helped me carry groceries inside when it started raining, or the time she had laughed at one of my jokes before catching herself and quickly masking her smile with a scowl. These memories didn't change the reality of how she had treated me. but they did add nuance to the story. Tia wasn't a one-dimensional villain. She was a complex, flawed human being, just like the rest of us. And while I couldn't excuse her behavior, I could at least begin to understand it. The next morning, I received a text from John. It was the first time he had reached out since our breakup. "Hey," the message read. "I just wanted to check in. Tia's been having a rough time, and I think she could really use someone to talk to. I know things ended badly between us, but if you're willing, I think she might listen to you." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it. After everything I had been through, wasn't it enough that I had already tried to help? Why should I put myself back into a situation that had caused me so much pain? But another part of me, the part that remembered Chloe's words and those fleeting moments of vulnerability from Tia, wondered if this was an opportunity to finally make a difference. In the end, I didn't reply right away. Instead, I spent the day reflecting on what I wanted and what I was capable of giving. Helping Tia might mean reopening old wounds, but it could also mean offering her a chance to heal. And maybe in the process, it'd find some healing for myself as well. As the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, I sat on my porch, phone in hand, and typed out a response. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Finally, I hit send. "I'll think about it," I wrote, and for now, that was enough. After sending that message to John, I spent the next few days in a haze of indecision. His text had stirred up emotions I thought I had tucked away for good. Did I really want to open that door again? Or was it better to keep moving forward, leaving the past where it belonged? I busied myself with work, but my mind kept drifting back to Tia and everything that had transpired. Every interaction, every insult, every brief moment where she seemed like a different person, it all came rushing back. I began to notice how much space she still occupied in my thoughts. It was almost frustrating, the way she lingered, as if her story with me wasn't finished yet. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table sipping tea, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Chloe. She had always respected my boundaries, so her reaching out now felt significant. "Hey, I hope you're doing okay. I heard from John that he reached out to you. I wanted to say thank you, whether you decide to help or not. You've always been good to Tia, even if she couldn't see it. Take care." I stared at the message for a long moment. Chloe's words were kind, but they added another layer to my conflicted feelings. If she, someone who knew Tia better than almost anyone, thought I had been good for her, did that mean I owed Tia something? Or was this just Chloe's way of reminding me of the potential impact I could have? The next day, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my mind. It was one of those brisk mornings where the air felt sharp but refreshing. As I passed a small playground, I noticed a teenage girl sitting on a swing, head down, scrolling through her phone. Something about her posture reminded me of Tia, the slump of her shoulders, the way she kicked at the ground absent-mindedly. For a moment, I thought about approaching her, just to see if she was okay, but I stopped myself. It wasn't Tia, and I had no right to intrude on a stranger's solitude. Still, the sight of her stayed with me, another small reminder of the unresolved chapter in my life. Back home, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time: bake. Cooking had always been a form of therapy for me, and it felt like the right way to channel my restless energy. I pulled out a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, one I hadn't used in years. As I measured and mixed, memories of baking with my grandmother filled my mind. She had always said that food had a way of bringing people together, of mending rifts and creating connections. I wondered if that could have worked with Tia. Had things been different, would she have softened if Wedge shared moments like these, or would she have dismissed it as another unwanted attempt to bond? By the time the cookies were in the oven, I felt a small sense of clarity. Maybe I didn't owe Tia anything, but that didn't mean I couldn't choose to help. There was a difference between obligation and choice, and understanding that difference felt liberating. Still, the idea of reaching out felt daunting. What would I even say to her? Would she even want to hear from me? That night, I sat down with my journal again, hoping to untangle my thoughts. I wrote about everything: the good, the bad, the moments of doubt, and the fleeting glimpses of hope. Somewhere in the middle of writing, I realized that my hesitation wasn't just about Tia. It was about me. I was afraid of reopening old wounds, of stepping back into a situation that had left me feeling drained and defeated. but I was also afraid of what it said about me if I didn't try. Was I really the kind of person who walked away when things got hard? Or was I someone who could rise above the pain and extend a hand even when it wasn't easy? The next morning, I decided to take a small step forward. I sent Chloe a text. Thank you for your message. I'm still figuring out how I feel about everything, but I appreciate your support. If Tia ever wants to talk, let me know. I can't promise anything, but I'm open to the possibility. Her response came quickly. That's more than enough. Thank you. I'll let her know. For the next few days, I waited, unsure if Tia would actually take me up on the offer. Part of me doubted she would have reaching out required a level of vulnerability that she had always resisted. But another part of me, the part that remembered the tears in her eyes when she talked about Jane, thought that maybe, just maybe, she would. Meanwhile, life went on. Work was busy, and I threw myself into my projects with a renewed sense of focus. I spent time with friends, went for long walks, and even started reading a new novel that had been sitting on my shelf for months. But through it all, Tia lingered in the back of my mind, a constant, nagging presence that I couldn't quite shake. One evening, as I was settling in with a cup of tea and my book, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. My heart skipped a beat as I opened the message. Hi, it's Tia. Mom said you're willing to talk. I don't know what to say, but I guess I just wanted to. I don't know. Thanks, I guess. The message was short and awkward, but it felt monumental. Tia had reached out. For the first time, she was the one making an effort, however small it might be. I took a deep breath and typed out a response. Hi, Tia. Thanks for reaching out. I am here if you ever want to talk. She didn't reply that night, and I didn't expect her to. The fact that she had even sent a message felt like a breakthrough. It was a tiny step, but it was a step nonetheless. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope, not just for her, but for both of us. As I set my phone down and stared out the window at the darkening sky, I realized that this wasn't about fixing the past or erasing the pain we had caused each other. It was about finding a way forward, one small step at a time. And for now, that was enough. Over the next few days, Tia's message lingered in my thoughts. It was a simple text, awkward and hesitant, but it had cracked open a door I thought was firmly closed. I'd spent months building walls to protect myself from her hostility, and now I was faced with a choice. Leave the door ajar and risk getting hurt again, or step through and see where it might lead. After a lot of reflection, I decided to take the leap. I sent her another message, suggesting we meet in person. To my surprise, she agreed. We settled on a quiet coffee shop downtown, a neutral space where we could talk without distractions. As the day of our meeting approached, I found myself oscillating between nerves and cautious optimism. I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish, but I knew I had to try. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Tia was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked smaller somehow, her usual defiant posture replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable. As I approached, she glanced up and gave me a hesitant smile. Hi, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. Hi, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, I took a deep breath and broke the ice. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. I know this isn't easy for either of us. She nodded, her gaze fixed on her mug. I guess I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. The words took me by surprise. I had expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even blame, but not this. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Thank you, I said finally. That means a lot to me. She looked up then, her eyes searching mine. I didn't mean to make things so hard for you. I was just, I don't know, angry, I guess. At my dad, at my mom, at everything. And you were just there. I nodded, my heart aching for the pain she was trying to articulate. I understand. And am sorry too. I wish I'd been able to handle things better. I tried to give you space, but maybe I should have done more to show you that I cared. She shook her head. It's not your fault. I just didn't want to let anyone in. It felt safer to keep everyone out. Her honesty was disarming, and for the first time, I felt like we were truly connecting. We spent the next hour talking, unraveling the tangled web of misunderstandings and hurt feelings that had defined our relationship. She told me about the pressure she felt to choose between her parents, about the guilt she carried for not being the perfect daughter, and about the fear of being replaced or forgotten. I listened, offering validation and understanding where I could. By the end of our conversation, the tension between us had eased. There were no grand declarations or instant fixes, but there was a sense of mutual respect and a shared desire to move forward. As we said our goodbyes, Tia gave me a small, tentative hug. It was the first time she had ever initiated physical contact with me, and it felt like a breakthrough. In the weeks that followed, our relationship continued to improve. Tia started texting me occasionally, sharing snippets of her day or asking for advice. They were small gestures, but they spoke volumes. Meanwhile, I reconnected with John on a casual basis, maintaining clear boundaries but finding a way to coexist peacefully for Tia's sake. Chloe was supportive throughout, often serving as a sounding board for both me and Tia as we navigated this new dynamic. One afternoon, Tia invited me to her school play. She was part of the stage crew, and while she insisted it wasn't a big deal, I could tell it meant something to her that I showed up. Sitting in the audience, watching her in her element, I felt a surge of pride. She was finding her way piece by piece, and I was grateful to be a small part of her journey. The process of rebuilding our relationship wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of friction, times when old habits and insecurities threatened to resurface. But each time, we managed to work through it, bolstered by a newfound commitment to understanding and supporting each other. As for me, I learned to let go of the resentment and pain I had been carrying. Forgiving Tia didn't mean excusing her behavior, but it did mean acknowledging her humanity and recognizing that we were both doing the best we could with the tools we had. In the end, the experience taught me as much about myself as it did about her. Months later, as I sat at my dining table with a cup of tea, I looked over at the empty space where my grandmother's antique picture used to sit. The loss of that treasured item had once felt insurmountable, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. But now it felt like a reminder of how far we'd come. The broken pieces had been swept away, and in their place, something new had begun to grow. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The story of Tia and me wasn't about perfection or easy resolutions. It was about growth, resilience, and the quiet power of choosing to try again.